The message came through at 300 station time, which meant Finn Drake was 3 drinks into forgetting why he'd chosen the loneliest profession in charted space. The data scroll materialized above his wristcom, with the kind of aggressive cheerfulness only automated systems could muster at unholy hours, and the credit figure attached made him sober up faster than any detox shot. 200,000 standard credits. For a repair job. Either someone desperately needed discretion or desperately needed him specifically, and Finn had built his reputation on not asking which. Port Meridian squatted on the edge of everything that mattered, a way station where trade routes frayed into the unmapped dark. Finn had been stuck here for 2 weeks waiting for parts that never arrived, watching his savings evaporate into overpriced station beer and the occasional bribe to dock control. The job broker's message contained coordinates, access codes, and absolutely nothing else useful. No ship specs, no damage report, just coordinates pointing to a private bay in the station's exclusive sector, the kind where people parked vessels worth more than Finn would earn in a lifetime. He grabbed his toolkit, a battered case that had followed him across a dozen systems, and headed down through the station's mechanical guts. Port Meridian was built from 3 decommissioned colony ships welded together by optimists who discovered that the middle of nowhere was actually prime real estate for people conducting business they preferred to keep quiet. The station's infrastructure reflected this. Pristine corridors for the wealthy clients on the upper levels, increasingly questionable maintenance as you descended, until you hit the lower decks where Finn could afford quarters and nobody asked questions about the burn marks on your luggage. The private bays existed in their own pocket of reality, actual security doors that worked, air that didn't taste recycled, and lighting that didn't flicker ominously every few minutes. Finn's access codes opened Bay 17, and he stepped through into a space large enough to house a small corvette. The ship waiting there made him stop and stare like a first-year academy student. She was beautiful in a way that made human engineering look like children's blocks. Smooth lines flowed from bow to stern without a single hard angle, the hull material shifting between silver and blue depending on how the light caught it. Organic curves suggested something grown rather than built, and the propulsion arrays integrated so seamlessly into the superstructure that Finn had to look twice to spot them. This was alien work, not the crude translations human corporations licensed and mass-produced, but something designed by minds that understood space differently. It was also damaged to hell. Scorch marks blackened the port side, the kind of precise burns that came from directed energy weapons rather than accidents. One of the landing struts was crumpled, and a section of the hull near the main drive showed the telltale crystallization pattern of a failed containment breach. Whoever had shot at this ship knew exactly where to aim. Finn was circling the vessel, mentally cataloging repairs and wondering what he'd gotten himself into, when a voice behind him said, "It looks worse than it is." He spun, toolkit rattling, and found himself facing a woman who definitely wasn't human but could have passed for one if you didn't look at the ears. They were pointed, not subtly pointed like the result of cosmetic modification, but genuinely elongated and swept back, the tips reaching past where human ears would end. Her hair was so blonde it was nearly white, pulled back in a practical braid that fell past her shoulders. Her skin had that same quality as the ship's hull, seeming to catch and reflect light in ways that suggested depth rather than surface. She wore simple clothes, a dark jacket over practical pants tucked into boots, but something about the way she moved suggested someone accustomed to being watched. "Sierra," she said, extending a hand. "This is my ship. You must be the mechanic." Finn shook her hand, noting the grip was firm without trying to prove anything. "Finn Drake, and I hate to contradict a client, but this definitely looks as bad as it is. What happened? You pick a fight with a defense grid." Her laugh was genuine, surprised. "Something like that, can you fix her?" He turned back to the ship, professional instinct overriding his questions about why someone who could afford a vessel like this Needed a freelancer working out of Port Meridian's lower decks. Depends what's broken inside. The exterior damage is mostly cosmetic, expensive cosmetic, but fixable. The real question is whether your drive core is compromised and whether your navigation systems are fried. The drive core is stable, Sira said, moving to stand beside him. I managed emergency shutdown before the breach spread. Navigation is partially functional. I got here, obviously, but the targeting protocols are completely scrambled and the sensor arrays are reading phantom contacts. Finn pulled out his diagnostic scanner, a device he'd rebuilt so many times it was more his work than its original manufacturer's. Phantom contacts usually mean your neural mesh is damaged. These ships use organic computing substrates, right? Growing crystal matrices instead of traditional processors. You know alien engineering. Sira sounded impressed. I know enough to be dangerous and just enough more to occasionally fix things. He approached the ship, running the scanner along the hull. I worked a mining operation in the outer reaches for a few years. We used repurposed Veridian transports. Their tech was a nightmare until you understood they don't think in on-off switches. Everything's gradients and harmonics. Once I figured out I was working with something closer to a nervous system than a circuit board, it made more sense. Most human mechanics won't touch non-human systems, Sira observed. Most human mechanics are scared of anything that doesn't come with an instruction manual and a corporate warranty. Finn's scanner chirped, showing him schematics that were equal parts beautiful and baffling. Also, most human mechanics haven't been desperate enough to take jobs they're not qualified for and accidentally discovered they're good at figuring things out. Sira laughed again and Finn decided he liked the sound. It was unguarded, natural, not the careful social performance people usually gave clients or strangers. How long? She asked. Finn studied the readouts, doing calculations that involved equal parts engineering knowledge and educated guessing. 4 days minimum if everything goes smoothly. 6 if I find nasty surprises, which I always do. The hull repairs are straightforward. I'll need to fabricate some replacement sections, but the station has decent enough facilities. The drive core I can recalibrate. The navigation systems. He trailed off, frowning at the data. Problem. Your neural mesh isn't just damaged, it's been deliberately corrupted. Someone introduced a feedback loop into the crystalline matrix. This wasn't combat damage, this was sabotage. Sira was quiet for a moment, and when Finn glanced at her, something in her expression had shifted. Not fear exactly, but acknowledgement of something she'd been avoiding thinking about. Can you fix it? She asked finally. Yeah, but it'll take time. I'll need to isolate each affected node, purge the corruption, and regrow the damaged sections. It's like surgery on a brain made of thinking crystal. He powered down the scanner. This is going to be expensive. The deposit should cover it. If not, I'll pay whatever the final cost is. She met his eyes directly. I need my ship functional, and I need someone who won't ask questions or report the repairs to station authorities. Not asking questions is basically my business model, Finn said. Though I reserve the right to make jokes about whatever mysterious circumstances led to someone sabotaging a very expensive alien vessel. Jokes I can handle. Sira smiled, and it transformed her face from striking to something warmer. When can you start? Finn checked his chrono. It was now 400 station time, and he was wide awake with 200,000 credits on the line and the most interesting repair job he'd seen in years waiting in front of him. How about now? Now works. Sira moved toward the ship's boarding ramp, which extended with a whisper of hydraulics far quieter than any human design. I'll show you the interior damage. Fair warning. The galley's environmental controls are stuck on whatever temperature my species finds comfortable, which humans apparently consider somewhere between sauna and surface of a minor sun. I've worked in worse, Finn said, following her up the ramp while mentally preparing himself for several days of challenging, well-paid work. He had no idea he was about to have conversations that would matter more than any repair he'd ever completed. Day 2 began with Finn elbow-deep in the ship's neural conduit array, cursing in 3 languages while bioluminescent coolant dripped onto his face. The crystalline pathways pulsed with their own internal light, creating patterns that were either diagnostic feedback or the ship's equivalent of laughing at him. He was betting on the latter. You know, most mechanics would have given up by now. Sira's voice came from somewhere above him. He'd learned she had a habit of appearing silently, which was impressive given the ship's corridors weren't exactly spacious. Most mechanics have better survival instincts than I do. Finn wiped coolant from his eyes, leaving a glowing smear across his forehead. Your ship's immune system keeps trying to reject my repairs. I'm starting to take it personally. The biosecurity protocols are sensitive. Here, Sira crouched beside the access panel, her elongated ears tilting forward in a gesture he'd learned meant focused attention. Try routing through the secondary pathway while I override the defensive response. Her fingers moved across a contact interface that had materialized from the wall's surface, patterns appearing and dissolving under her touch faster than Finn could follow. The hostile pulsing in the conduit settled into something more cooperative, and he seized the opportunity to finish splicing the damaged section. Got it. He extracted himself from the maintenance shaft with significantly less dignity than he'd entered it, coolant-stained and smelling faintly of ozone. You know, most clients don't actively help with repairs. Most clients don't understand their own ships well enough to help. Sira offered him a cloth that looked soft but felt like it was actively absorbing the coolant from his skin. Besides, watching you work is more interesting than sitting alone in my quarters. They'd fallen into this pattern over the past day and a half. Finn would tackle a repair while Sira observed, asking questions that demonstrated she understood the theoretical principles even if the practical application was foreign to her. She'd brought food, first from the station's noodle vendor, which she'd apparently developed a fondness for, then from her own supplies once she discovered Finn's species could metabolize most of her cuisine without dying. I still can't believe you eat this casually, Finn had said yesterday, tears streaming as he'd tried her version of a simple lunch. My mouth thinks it's under chemical attack. That's barely seasoned by my people's standards. We'd feed that to children. But she'd smiled and produced something milder, along with a drink that tasted like citrus and starlight and made his brain pleasantly fuzzy. Now, cleaned up as much as possible, Finn headed toward the propulsion module while Sira walked beside him. The ship's interior was as elegant as its exterior, corridors that curved in ways that somehow felt more natural than human right angles, lighting that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, surfaces that were warm to the touch and occasionally rippled like water when you passed. Can I ask you something? Finn said as they entered the engineering bay, where the damaged drive core waited like a sleeping beast. You're going to anyway. Fair point, why are you here? I mean not philosophically, though we can have that conversation if you want, but specifically, Port Meridian. This is where people come when they're running from something or looking for something they can't find in civilized space. You've got a ship that probably costs more than this entire station, and you're hiding in a private bay paying a freelance mechanic to fix sabotage damage. He started setting up his equipment around the drive core, not looking at her. I'm not asking for details. I'm just curious if I should expect more people with energy weapons to show up. Sira was quiet long enough that Finn glanced over. She'd settled onto a cargo container with her legs crossed, looking smaller than someone who moved with such confidence should look. I needed to disappear for a while, she said finally. My life is complicated, structured, every moment planned, every interaction scripted. Someone close to me decided I wasn't following the script properly and arranged for my ship to develop critical malfunctions far from help. She met his eyes. The sabotage was meant to strand me, make me dependent. Instead, I managed to limp here where nobody asks questions. Sounds like you need better people in your life. I'm starting to think you're right. She smiled, but something sad lingered in it. It's strange. I've been here 2 days, and I've had more genuine conversations with you than I've had in months at home. Finn wanted to ask what kind of life she led where casual conversation was rare, but the drive core's containment field flickered ominously, and he decided not dying was more important than satisfying curiosity. The next several hours blurred into the focused intensity that Finn loved about complex repairs. The drive core was a thing of beauty, a sphere of interwoven energy fields containing a fragment of something that existed partially in normal space and partially somewhere else. The breach had destabilized the containment geometry, causing feedback loops that would eventually either fail catastrophically or tear a hole into dimensions humans had thankfully never visited. Sierra watched him work with an intensity that should have been unnerving but somehow wasn't. She asked questions. Why he was adjusting the field harmonics that way, what would happen if the phase variance exceeded tolerance, how he could tell the difference between stable and unstable energy patterns when they looked identical to her. It's like music, Finn explained, making micro-adjustments to the containment projectors. You can't see the difference between a note that's in tune and one that's slightly off, but you can hear it. These fields have a resonance. When they're right, everything hums at the same frequency. When they're wrong, there's dissonance. You can hear dimensional mathematics. I can feel it, maybe hear it. Honestly, I'm not sure if it's real or if my brain invented a metaphor it can work with. He stepped back as the containment field stabilized, the dangerous shimmer settling into a steady glow. Either way, your drive core is no longer trying to create a portal to somewhere unpleasant. My hero. Sierra's tone was light teasing, but when Finn looked at her, her expression was genuinely grateful. Seriously, though, thank you. I know I'm paying you, but the skill required to do what you just did, most mechanics wouldn't even attempt it. Most mechanics have common sense. Finn started packing his tools. I lost mine somewhere around my third near-death experience and decided to just lean into being the guy who fixes impossible things. How many near-death experiences are you up to now? Lost count around 17, though I'm pretty sure at least 3 of those were the same incident from different perspectives, so the actual number might be lower. They ended up in the galley again, which had become their unofficial meeting place. Sierra had programmed the environmental controls to something between her preference and his, resulting in temperatures that were merely uncomfortably warm rather than potentially lethal. She prepared food while Finn sprawled in a chair that had molded itself to his body, in ways furniture shouldn't be able to, but which felt amazing after hours of contorting through maintenance shafts. Tell me about the mining operation, Sierra said, working with ingredients that shifted colors as she cut them. In the outer reaches. Not much to tell. I was young, stupid, and convinced I was going to make a fortune. Turns out mining operations in unregulated space are mostly dangerous, occasionally profitable, and run by people who view safety regulations as suggestions for the weak. He accepted the plate she offered, food arranged in patterns that were too aesthetically pleasing to be accidental. But the Viridian transports they used were fascinating. Living ships, basically. Everything biological, self-repairing, but temperamental as hell. I spent more time learning to communicate with them than actually fixing them. You talk to ships. Sierra settled across from him with her own meal. Ships, drive cores, navigation systems, anything that seems like it might be listening. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes I look insane, often both. He tried the food, which was mercifully less spicy than yesterday's attempt. What about you? You know a suspicious amount about your own ship systems for someone who needs a mechanic. I'm good with theory, terrible with practice. I can tell you exactly how the neural mesh should integrate with the propulsion controls, but if you asked me to actually repair a damaged node, I'd probably make it worse. She paused, something shifting in her expression. I wasn't always allowed to be hands-on with things. Where I'm from, there are, expectations about what people in my position should and shouldn't do. Sounds frustrating. You have no idea. She looked at him directly, and Finn saw something vulnerable beneath the confidence. That's why I'm here, really. These few days, fixing the ship, talking to you, it's the first time in longer than I can remember that I've felt like just a person. Not a position or a title or an obligation. Just Sira, sitting in her damaged ship's galley, eating too spicy food with someone who argues with drive cores. Finn found himself wanting to know more. About her life, her home, what had driven her to the edge of mapped space seeking anonymity. But something in her posture suggested she'd shared more than she'd intended, and he'd learned when to let silence do the work. For what it's worth, he said finally, you're pretty good at being just a person. Very convincing performance. She laughed, tension breaking. High praise from someone who talks to starship components. They're better conversationalists than most humans I've met. They talked late into the station's artificial night. Conversation wandering from engineering philosophy to bad decisions. They'd survived to whether the universe was fundamentally orderly or chaotic. Finn couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed someone's company this much, and he found himself dreading the moment when repairs would be complete and Sira would leave, taking these strange, comfortable conversations back to whatever complicated life she was hiding from. He didn't yet know that she was dreading that moment even more. Day 4 arrived with Finn completing the final diagnostic sequence, and the ship's systems responded with a harmony that made his engineer's heart sing. Every subsystem synced perfectly, the neural mesh pulsed with healthy bioluminescence, and the propulsion arrays hummed at frequencies that suggested they were actually better than before the sabotage. He'd done good work, maybe the best work of his career. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt an uncomfortable tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental controls. Sira found him in the navigation bay, staring at readouts that confirmed what they both knew. Everything was fixed. The job was done. She's ready, Finn said, gesturing at the displays showing perfect operational status across every system. Hull integrity restored, drive core recalibrated, neural mesh purged and regrown, navigation protocols rebuilt from scratch. You could jump to the other side of known space right now if you wanted. He pulled up his final invoice on a datapad, the numbers adding up to slightly less than the deposit. Actually came in under budget if you can believe it. Turns out when nothing explodes unexpectedly, repairs go faster. Sira took the datapad but didn't look at it. Finn, before we settle accounts, there's something I need to tell you. You're not going to pay me. Because I have to tell you, I already spent that money mentally, and explaining to my creditors that my rich client stiffed me is going to be awkward. I'm going to pay you. She set the datapad down on the navigation console, but you should know who's actually paying you. Something in her tone made the tightness in Finn's chest twist differently. I'm going to hate this, aren't I? Possibly. Sira took a breath, and Finn noticed her hands were clasped together tightly enough that her knuckles showed pale against her already pale skin. My full name is Seraphine Luminara. I'm the ruling queen of the Luminara Confederacy. Finn blinked. I'm sorry, you're a what now? A queen, sovereign ruler, head of state for a confederation spanning 47 worlds and about 200 billion citizens. She said it matter-of-factly, watching his face. The ship damage wasn't random. It was arranged by members of my own court who thought I was becoming too independent in my decision-making. They wanted me stranded, vulnerable, dependent on their rescue. Instead, I made it here and found you. Finn's brain was doing something between processing and completely shutting down. He replayed the last 4 days in his head, sharing meals, joking about drive cores, Sira sitting on cargo containers asking earnest questions about harmonics and field theory. The woman who'd laughed until she cried when he'd gotten stuck in the maintenance shaft and had to be pulled out by his ankles. You're telling me, he said slowly, that I've been treating galactic royalty like a regular client. That I made jokes about your life being complicated while you were dealing with what? Interstellar politics and assassination attempts. Sabotage attempts, technically, though the distinction probably doesn't matter much. Seraphine's voice was quieter now. And yes, you treated me exactly like a regular client. That's why I didn't tell you. Because you thought I'd, what? Start bowing, speaking in formal language. Stop arguing with you about optimal energy distribution. All of that. She met his eyes, and Finn saw something raw in her expression. Everyone I interact with treats me like a crown with a person attached. Every conversation is choreographed. Every relationship calculated for political advantage. My advisors schedule my meals. My security detail monitors my movements. My court officials tell me what to think about reports I'm theoretically in charge of. I can't remember the last time someone spoke to me without an agenda. Finn leaned against the navigation console, trying to organize thoughts that were racing in several directions simultaneously. So you came to Port Meridian. To hide. To be just Sierra for a few days before my security forces track me down. She laughed, but it sounded brittle. The sabotage gave me an excuse. I needed repairs, so I found the most discreet mechanic I could hire on short notice, someone working far enough from major systems that they wouldn't recognize me. That's why you kept asking questions, why you watched me work. You weren't just interested in your ship. I was interested in having a conversation where someone saw me as a person instead of a political entity. Seraphine's composure was cracking, vulnerability showing through. Do you understand how rare that is? You argued with me about flux capacitor configurations. You made jokes about my food being a war crime. You explained dimensional mathematics like I was a student instead of someone to be managed. She paused. You treated me like Sierra, just Sierra. Finn ran a hand through his hair, which was still faintly stained with bioluminescent coolant no amount of washing would remove. I called a queen, suspiciously knowledgeable for someone who needs a mechanic. I made you sit in environmental conditions I described as somewhere between uncomfortable and potentially criminal. I ate your food and complained it was trying to kill me. I know. Seraphine smiled, and it transformed her face the way it always did. It was the best 4 days I've had in years. They stood there in the navigation bay, the ship's systems humming contentedly around them, while Finn tried to reconcile the woman he'd been talking to with the reality of who she actually was. The scary part was that nothing fundamental changed. She was still Sierra, curious, funny, lonely in ways that had nothing to do with being physically alone. The crown was just context he hadn't had before. How long before your people find you? He asked. They already know where I am. They've known since day 2. My ship's signature is too distinctive to hide completely. But my head of security is loyal enough to give me time and smart enough to know forcing me back immediately would cause problems. She picked up the datapad with his invoice again. I told them I'd return when repairs were complete, which they are now. So you're leaving. I have to. There's a succession crisis developing. 2 of my cousins think they should be ruling instead of me. There's a trade dispute that's about to become a shooting war if I don't mediate. There are approximately 800 things that need my attention, my signature, my presence. She looked at the invoice, then at him. But I don't want to go back to that. Not now that I remember what it feels like to be treated like a person. Finn understood what she wasn't saying. The job's done, Your Majesty. Ship's fixed, payments due, and you go back to ruling the galaxy while I find the next impossible repair to survive. Don't call me that. Her voice was sharp, almost desperate. Not you, please. What should I call you then? Because apparently I've been operating under false pretenses for 4 days, and I need to recalibrate my sense of reality. Call me Sierra. That's who I am when I'm here, when I'm with you. She set the datapad down again, decision crystallizing in her expression. I've been thinking about this for 2 days now, trying to figure out how to ask without it sounding insane. But in my experience, anything that requires that much preface is definitely insane. Probably, she took a breath. I want to hire you permanently as my personal ship engineer. Finn laughed, the sound escaping before he could stop it. You want me to work at your court? Sira, your majesty, I'm a freelance mechanic who lives out of a duffel bag and whose last permanent address was a mining station that got condemned for safety violations. I'm not exactly royal court material. I don't need court material. I have hundreds of people whose entire existence revolves around being appropriate for court. What I need is someone who sees me as Sira instead of Queen Seraphine. Someone who will tell me when I'm wrong about energy distribution patterns and make jokes about my terrible taste in food temperatures. Her hands were clasped together again, knuckles white. Someone who treats me like a person. You're serious? Completely. The position comes with quarters, salary, and the ongoing opportunity to argue with me about ship systems. Also, my security detail is going to hate you, which I consider a bonus feature. Finn looked at her, really looked at her. At Sira, who'd sat on cargo containers eating noodles and asking questions about neural mesh integration with genuine curiosity. At Seraphine, who ruled billions but couldn't remember the last time someone had treated her like she was just another person worth talking to. At the woman who'd spent 4 days hiding from her own life and was now offering him a place in it. This is the worst idea I've ever heard, he said finally. I don't know the first thing about court politics or royal protocol. I'm going to offend someone important, probably within the first hour. Your advisors are going to think you've lost your mind. They already think that. This will just confirm their suspicions. She smiled, hope and uncertainty mixing in her expression. Is that a no? Finn thought about his life, the loneliness he'd admitted to her, the endless cycle of jobs and stations and temporary quarters, the freedom that sometimes felt more like floating untethered than liberation. Then he thought about the last 4 days, about conversations that felt real in ways most of his interactions didn't, about someone who needed exactly what he needed, to be seen as themselves. When do we leave? He asked. The relief in Seraphine's expression was worth every complication he was signing up for. The royal guard arrived exactly 1 hour later, which Finn suspected was Seraphine giving them just enough time to make her announcement seem spontaneous rather than planned. 6 warriors in ceremonial armor that probably cost more than Finn's entire toolkit materialized in the docking bay, their presence transforming the space from comfortable to oppressively formal in seconds. The one in front, taller than the others, with decorative rank insignia that glowed with their own internal light, removed his helmet to reveal features similar to Seraphine's but harder, shaped by years of professional paranoia. His elongated ears were decorated with metallic cuffs that Finn assumed meant something important in their culture. Your Majesty. His voice carried the kind of controlled fury that came from extreme discipline, barely containing extreme frustration. 3 days. We've given you 3 days while the Confederacy descended into chaos. The Council demands your immediate return. Seraphine straightened, and Finn watched her transform. Her posture shifted, her expression cooled, and suddenly he could see the queen everyone else encountered, someone accustomed to authority, to being obeyed without question. It was like watching someone put on armor more effective than anything her guards wore. Commander Vex, she acknowledged, and I appreciate your patience, though I note you tracked my location within hours of my arrival and have been monitoring this station the entire time. Security protocol, Your Majesty, especially after the sabotage. Vex's gaze shifted to Finn with the kind of assessment that made him acutely aware he was still wearing clothes stained with coolant and possibly lunch. The hired mechanic, I assume. Finn Drake is an accomplished engineer whose skills saved both my life and my ship, Seraphine corrected, ice in her tone. You'll address him with appropriate respect, Commander. Vex's expression suggested he had opinions about appropriate respect for mechanics found on backwater stations, but he simply inclined his head. Of course, Your Majesty, if the repairs are complete, We should depart immediately. The situation at court requires your attention. I'm aware of the situation, Commander. I've been receiving your increasingly urgent reports. Seraphine moved to stand beside Finn, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the guards. Which is why I've made arrangements for the journey back. Mr. Drake has accepted a permanent position as my personal ship engineer. The silence that followed was the kind that preceded either explosions or complete systemic collapse. Vex's expression cycled through several emotions before settling on professional neutrality that probably required significant effort. Your Majesty, while I'm sure Mr. Drake is competent, bringing an unknown element into the royal household requires security clearance, background verification, and council approval. Protocol exists to serve me, Commander, not the other way around. Seraphine's voice carried an edge Finn hadn't heard before. I'm invoking my sovereign right to appoint personal staff without council interference, unless you'd like to argue that right has been revoked. Vex looked like he absolutely wanted to argue but couldn't find legal ground to stand on. Of course not, Your Majesty. However, for his own safety, Mr. Drake should understand what he's agreeing to. The court is not a station maintenance bay. The political situation is volatile, and your enemies will view anyone close to you as a potential target or leverage. That already got sabotaged once this week, Finn said, surprising himself by speaking. Might as well make it a regular occurrence. Several guards' hands moved toward weapons before Vex raised a hand to stop them. You think this is amusing? I think humor is how I cope with making terrible decisions, and this is possibly the worst decision I've ever made. Finn looked at Seraphine. But someone recently taught me that sometimes you have to stop floating and grab onto something real, even if it's complicated. Seraphine's expression softened just enough for Finn to see Sira beneath the queen. Well said, though I'm fairly certain I never phrased it quite that way. I'm paraphrasing. Engineers are better with systems than speeches. Vex made a sound that might have been a suppressed sigh or a prayer for patience. Your Majesty, I strongly advise. Your advice is noted, Commander, and I'm overruling it. Seraphine's tone left no room for argument. Prepare for departure. Mr. Drake will travel aboard my ship. I assume you brought a full escort. 3 warships, Your Majesty. More than sufficient for the journey to Luminara Prime. Excessive, but I've learned to pick my battles with you. She turned to Finn. You'll need to gather your things from your quarters. I'll send someone to help. I've got 1 duffel bag and a toolkit. I can manage. Finn met Vex's glare with what he hoped was friendly nonchalance. Should I expect the security screening to be invasive, mildly invasive, or please sign this waiver releasing us from liability if we accidentally discover your embarrassing secrets invasive? Very thorough, Vex said flatly. Great. Fair warning, my embarrassing secrets are mostly about repair jobs that went wrong in entertaining ways. You're going to be very bored. The commander looked at Seraphine with an expression that clearly communicated he thought she'd lost her mind. She smiled back with serene confidence that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing, even if nobody else did. Finn retrieved his belongings while one of the guards, a woman who introduced herself as Lieutenant Kess and seemed slightly less hostile than the others, escorted him with the kind of vigilance usually reserved for handling unstable explosives. His quarters in the lower decks looked even more depressing than usual, and he found himself not at all sorry to leave them behind. Back at the docking bay, Seraphine was speaking with Vex in low tones that suggested disagreement being maintained at professional volumes. She broke off when Finn approached and something in her expression eased. Ready? She asked. Absolutely not, but let's do this anyway. He gestured at his single bag. I travel light, easier to run when things go wrong. Things are going to go wrong constantly, Seraphine said. Court politics make sabotage look straightforward. But, she paused, choosing words carefully. I'd rather face it with someone who sees Sira than face it alone surrounded by people who only see the crown. Touching speech, Your Majesty, Vex interjected. But we need to depart. The council has scheduled an emergency session, and your cousins are already positioning themselves to claim you're unfit to rule due to erratic behavior. My cousins think eating with utensils instead of having food delivered pre-chewed is erratic behavior. Seraphine started toward her ship, Finn falling into step beside her, while guards formed an escort that was probably excessive for a docking bay. Let them make their arguments. I'll be present to refute them, with my ship fully operational and my newly appointed engineer ready to testify that I'm perfectly capable of making sound decisions. I'm your character witness, Finn asked. The guy they found fixing your ship on a station known primarily for questionable legality and decent noodles. You're the person who spent 4 days with me and didn't once treat me like a political instrument. That matters more than you know. They boarded together, the ship's systems welcoming them back with harmonics that Finn had fine-tuned himself. The guards followed, uncomfortable in the organic corridors, while Vex gave orders to the escort ships through encrypted channels. Finn found himself standing in the navigation bay where hours ago he'd learned the woman he'd been sharing meals with ruled a chunk of the galaxy. Seraphine stood beside him, and for a moment neither spoke. Your Majesty, Vex called from the corridor, we're ready for departure. One moment, Commander. She turned to Finn. Last chance. You could still stay here, take your payment, find the next impossible job. No one would blame you. I absolutely would blame me, Finn said. Besides, someone needs to maintain this ship properly, and I refuse to let anyone else mess up my work. Professional pride, I can respect that. Also, he hesitated, then figured he was already committed to terrible decisions. These were the first conversations I've had in years where I felt like myself instead of just the mechanic. Turns out connection matters more than I thought. Seraphine smiled, genuine and warm and entirely Sira despite the crown waiting for her at journey's end. Then let's go home. Fair warning. My advisors are going to try to manage you, my cousins are going to try to use you against me, and my court is going to be absolutely scandalized. Can't wait. I've always wanted to scandalize people, too important to appreciate the humor. She laughed, and the sound filled the navigation bay with something that felt like hope. The ship lifted from the docking bay, Port Meridian falling away behind them, and Finn realized he wasn't just traveling to a new job or a new location. He was choosing connection over isolation, complication over safety, and partnership with someone who needed exactly what he needed, to be seen as themselves. The repair job was complete. Everything else was just beginning.